There was once a man who lived in a village nestled between two mountains. He was known for his temper, a fire that burned so brightly it often left him scorched and those around him singed. His name was forgotten over time, but his reputation lingered like the smell of smoke after a wildfire. People called him the man who could not be calmed. He wore his anger like armor, believing it made him strong. But deep down, he carried a weight he could not name, a heaviness that pressed against his chest, making it hard to breathe. One day, a traveler arrived in the village. She was an old woman with eyes like still water, and she carried nothing but a small wooden bowl. The villagers whispered about her, saying she was a healer, a sage, or perhaps something more. The man who could not be calmed scoffed at their superstitions. But something about her presence unsettled him. She seemed to see through his armor, past the anger, into the quiet ache he had buried so long ago. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the old woman approached him. She held out her wooden bowl and said, "Fill this with water from the river, but do not spill a single drop." He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the stones. "What kind of test is this? I could do it with my eyes closed." She smiled faintly and said, "Then do it." He took the bowl and marched to the river, his steps heavy with irritation. The river was not far, but the path was uneven, and the bowl was shallow. He dipped it into the water, watching as it filled to the brim. As he turned to walk back, a pebble shifted beneath his foot, and a drop of water spilled over the edge. He cursed under his breath and returned to the river to fill it again. This time, he walked more carefully, his eyes fixed on the bowl. But as he neared the old woman, a gust of wind swept through the valley, and another drop was lost. Frustration boiled within him, but he clenched his jaw and went back to the river. He filled the bowl a third time, his hands trembling with the effort to keep it steady. He moved slowly, deliberately, his focus narrowing to the water, the bowl, the path. But as he approached the old woman, a child ran past him, laughing, and the sudden movement startled him. Another drop spilled. He slammed the bowl onto the ground, water splashing onto the dirt. "This is impossible," he shouted, his voice raw with anger. The old woman picked up the bowl, her movements unhurried, and handed it back to him. "Try again," she said simply. He wanted to refuse, to walk away, but something in her calmness held him there. He took the bowl and returned to the river. This time, he knelt by the water's edge and closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and let it out slowly. He dipped the bowl into the river, feeling the weight of the water, the smoothness of the wood. When he stood, he moved with a stillness he had never known, his body in harmony with the rhythm of his breath. The wind blew, the child laughed, but he remained steady, his mind quiet, his heart open. When he reached the old woman, the bowl was full, not a drop spilled. She took it from him and said, "Anger is like water in a shallow bowl. It spills easily when you are not still. But when you are calm, when you are present, you can carry it without losing a drop." The man stared at her, his chest rising and falling with the weight of her words. For the first time in his life, he felt the armor of his anger crack, not from force, but from understanding. He sat down beside her, his hands resting on his knees, and asked, "How do I stay calm when the world is so loud?" She smiled and said, "The world is always loud. But the stillness is within you. It is not something you find, it is something you remember. Like the river, it is always there, flowing beneath the surface. You need only to listen. From that day on, the man began to change. He still felt anger, but it no longer controlled him. He learned to carry it like water in a bowl, with care and presence. And when the world grew loud, he would close his eyes, take a deep breath, and remember the stillness within him. The villagers no longer called him the man who could not be calmed. They simply called him by his name, a name he had almost forgotten. And though the old woman left the village as quietly as she had come, her lesson remained, like the river, flowing beneath the surface of his life. In the end, he realized that emotional mastery was not about never feeling anger, fear, or grief. It was about learning to carry those emotions without letting them spill over, to hold them with grace and let them flow when the time was right. And in that understanding, he found a strength far greater than any armor could provide, a strength born not of resistance, but of presence.